Hey friends, welcome back to Heretical Hippies, where Anna and Kari Jo wander back into the wreckage of their deconstruction to see if they can offer hope to anyone else who might be climbing out of the dust and ashes of their faith. Buckle up, it's about to get real. Hey, Heretical Hippies, welcome back to another episode. I'm Kari Jo, and I'm here with Anna.
Hi, everybody.
And we have another special guest today, one of whom I probably know more about than I should. It's my husband. Just a quick intro to who this lovely man is. He is a husband to moi. He is a father of 3 amazing young men. He is an OBGYN, working in Naples currently, but has served overseas in Nigeria for 7 years, working as a fistula surgeon, and is indeed internationally recognized. I don't know what else to say about him. He's a wonderful man. He is going to share his deconstruction story with us, and I'm actually hoping to learn a little bit about him as well in this interview. So I'll get us started, but Stephen, we want to welcome you officially to the Heretical Hippie podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's amazing how much stuff you knew about me in advance.
I know I did like a Google search, so I made sure I had my facts right. To start us off, though, we would love it if you'd tell us just briefly about your religious upbringing, what that looked like for you.
I was in a Christian household growing up, attended church every Sunday or essentially every Sunday, and then felt like I really had an interaction with God through an Awana program that a lot of people may be familiar with as like a midweek program aimed at youth, children, to help them understand the Bible and who God is. And from there, just continued to grow in my faith, especially through college, where things became more and more real and my own. And it was in that time that I felt a call from God to enter the medical field, to become a missionary, which led to you and I moving to Africa several years later. And I don't know that I would have put that soundtrack to moving to Africa, but that's okay.
Well, we don't.
And
No, it was you and I getting together. That was the thing.
oh, that followed me talking about going to Africa. So I thought, my goodness.
Bad timing. Sorry, continue.
So how long were you guys together before you went to Africa?
Oh, gosh.
Oh, that's a good question. I think that
It was
we got
2011
together
when we left.
Yeah,
So
it was
9
about 10
years?
years prior to that
Okay.
we may have started dating, got married not all that long afterwards, and then we were together through medical school and residency program. All of that with the plan to move to Africa. It was right from the beginning that we were anticipating moving there.
Wow. So you were in Africa for 7 years.
Correct.
And then after that, you came back to the States and you settled in Florida. And how long ago was that?
Actually, no, we settled in Michigan first.
Okay.
Yeah, we were in Michigan.
I would
then
say that we
Florida.
unsettled in Michigan.
Yeah.
Unsettled, yeah.
It wasn't
So
particularly
how long ago
settling.
did you return from Africa?
We got back in 2018.
Wow, so like right before COVID.
That's true.
So I'd really be interested in hearing. Obviously this podcast is about deconstruction, and now people have got a taste of like where you've been, what you've been up to. Obviously, you've taken great care of people throughout your lifetime with your medical practice, and I mean, honestly, fistula surgeries, like how many people, let alone men, can actually say, "Oh yeah, I repair women's body parts." You know, like that is pretty phenomenal. Thank you for doing that. Honestly, like I remember meeting Kari Jo and hearing your stories and learning that you guys were there to help women in that way, and it was really inspiring. As a midwife and former midwife and doula, I definitely could relate to the need for that, and I had heard the stories of the mutilation of women's bodies there, and so first of all, thank you for being willing to do that. It's a beautiful thing. And since coming back now, you continue to practice as an OB, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I've always embraced trying to empower women as part of my job, part of who I am, and what I've been doing throughout my medical career. It was a real privilege to be able to serve overseas and take care of women who desperately needed someone to validate them and enable them to maximize their health and be the best version of them that they could be. I don't have
Mhm.
as much in that same way of like fistula and mutilation repair now in the United States, but the concept remains the same of still empowering women to step forward, to be the best version of themselves, to have equality. Heaven forbid, my goodness. Maybe we should try to help
Mhm.
women to have equal standing in the United States, which somehow we still aren't fully to. But it's been a real privilege to serve in that way.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you for doing that. From one woman speaking on behalf of all women. Thank you for the work that you do, Stephen. Um, yeah, and I imagine that you've inspired a lot of people along the way. So I'm really, really curious to hear how deconstruction, like if there was a couple of points that were kind of transitional for you in your walk, and how that, if that even affected even your work as well. Be curious.
Well, as far as deconstruction goes, I've I'm not a huge fan of the term deconstruction personally. I absolutely understand the concept, and you have to sometimes put a label to things just so that people understand what you're talking about.
Mhm.
I have more embraced a concept of untangling or detangling, which I think I heard from someone else, and I wish I could remember who it was so I could give credit to that sort of a thought. But I always felt like deconstruction sounds more like an implosion or things absolutely falling apart. But I personally have felt it in my own life more as an untangling of things that were unnecessary or that were um, placed upon faith and belief and God that maybe should not have been there to begin with,
Mhm.
and ways that can enable us to better understand who God really is and let go of the things we didn't need right from the beginning. For me personally, how did that fall into place? To answer that question, I guess parts of it stemmed from knowing some people in the LGBTQ community and recognizing that they were just normal people, that what I had been taught was normal, which is heterosexual relationships, and that if you are not in that, that you are choosing to do that, didn't really apply. That my friends who were in the LGBTQ community clearly felt that that was who they were, not that they were choosing to be deviant somehow. And then I met several along the way who had very interactive relationships with God and in a positive way where I could see that God was working in them and through them. And clearly, it was obvious to me that if God is doing that, why am I somehow choosing to separate them as if they're unacceptable, untouchable? And so it just didn't line up with what I thought the Bible was supposed to be telling me, or at least what the church was telling me I was supposed to believe. Then moving back from Nigeria gave me a chance to look at how does God look in different environments, in different cultures, and realizing that how people see and interact with a God figure or the divine is very different from one place to another. And so the American version of Christianity became very distasteful to me as a whole, just in that it assumed that they were absolutely and 100% correct and everyone else was wrong. Whereas my Nigerian brothers and sisters, who were honestly trying to seek and understand God, may have seen things differently. But it probably, in my view, was more looking at God from a different direction. So I'm standing on this side looking at God, they're standing on that side looking at God. And so we see the same person, but we see it differently. So it helped me to realize that perhaps the things that I was taught are absolutes, maybe just aren't quite so absolute. And it gave me freedom to start looking at things a little differently. And maybe it's not 100% what I thought that it was before.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that idea of looking at the same. one God from different angles and perspectives. It makes sense in our normal everyday life too. You know, like I see you through a screen right now, and Kari Jo gets to see you in person, right? And
Exactly.
your patients get to see you from in a different outfit, in a different role. And so if you look at one person in the many ways and facets that their environment and crowd around them sees them, you could apply that same concept to the idea of who we might think God is.
Right.
Yeah, that's
I
cool.
love
I like
that.
that, Anna. That's a good visual to understand. Like,
Mhm.
because something I'm fascinated by are the different cultures, and not just Christianity within different cultures, but just different religious systems or belief in a higher power. And it's fascinating to look at Hinduism and Buddhism and just to see how God or divine or higher power manifests itself within those cultures. And um yeah, I love that. I love the diversity of
Mhm.
this higher power, this view of God throughout the world. It's pretty challenging. Coming from a super certain, we have all the answers mindset of evangelical Christianity. It took me a while to get to that place where I was comfortable even thinking about that. But I really love learning more. Like I have a book on Hinduism that I'm slowly making my way through right now, and it's really interesting. The other thing that's interesting though is that like there are similar doctrines from what I would call toxic Christian beliefs that show themselves in other belief systems. And
Interesting.
yes, and like one of them is, and it's not all religions, but one of them is like the evil of man, of mankind.
Mhm.
Which actually, Stephen, that brings me to a question I want to ask you if you're comfortable sharing. Um, which doctrines have you jettisoned? Like, tell us some of the untangling that you've done specifically, and maybe how you got there. Maybe if there's like a pivotal book you read or a podcast you heard or something like that. If that's on the top of your head.
That's a great question, and I'm absolutely comfortable talking about it. And I'll tell you that perhaps if I listen to this podcast again in 2 years, I may have a different stance at that point than I do today. And I think that that's okay. And that's part of what I've recognized and part of the untangling that I've had. We talk in evangelical Christianity about a spiritual journey, but there really isn't room to allow people to have a spiritual journey in many cases. Often, what it means or what is implied is you becoming more like me. It's you, as the people out in the church, better understanding what I know is correct and what you have wrong. And in reality, I think a better understanding of a spiritual journey is the fact that we're always, all of us, trying to better understand the world around us, who God is, how we fit in that picture. So I lost my train of thought on that, but I do
Well, actually,
agree.
I want to interject something. So that's
It
kind of perfect
happens.
timing, and I'm glad you lost your train of thought. Like you were saying, making sense of our faith through, the world around us. And the one thing that I really hold against my Christian experience is there was no room for reconciling the doctrines with my lived experience.
Aha,
And
Mm.
yes.
it sounds to me like that's a little bit what you're touching on is like the spiritual journey actually leaving space for that, for allowing what you experience in your life to inform your belief about God, or to be more evidence for or against some belief that you may hold previously.
And that helps me remember what it was that I was aiming at or what you were asking me. Like, what did I let go of and how did I get to that point? I think for me personally, I realized all the way along that there are so many variations of what people believe within different denominations, but even within the church, I recognize that in a church, everybody assumes they all believe the same thing, but they don't. So they all have slight variations on it. And I've always recognized it can't possibly be that I'm 100% correct and everyone else is wrong. And God seems to have some ability to accept the fact that we don't fully understand him, which would make sense if he is unknowable in human capacity. So it's easier, I think, for me to let go of certain things. I studied theology before Kari Jo and I got together. And then I studied it while we were together and while we were training for missions. And I recognized that certain theological viewpoints I didn't 100% agree with at that time anyway. And so I just kind of went, well, I'm supposed to believe these 5 points of Calvinism, but I don't exactly agree with it. So it made it easier for me to let go of things along the way now that I started untangling, as I said. Things that influenced me was recognizing that there is a whole group of biblical scholars who agree that the Bible is not meant to be taken literally, and we need to look at it instead of as a literalistic viewpoint from a United States citizen in 2024. We need to look at it as how did they intend to write it back in that time. And so studying things in a different direction and hearing from different experts, which one that I've really enjoyed is the Bible for Normal People podcast series, where there's people who this is their whole job, their PhD level experts, scholars looking at the Bible and what does it actually say? People who actually study Greek, not just a pastor saying, well, in the Greek it says this, but somebody who really
Right.
understands that and the literary aspects of it. So helping see it from that point of view and realizing that I didn't have to see it from an American point of view, but if I stop and remember, in Nigeria, the culture is different. The way they look at things is different. The way that there is in that culture not a written history, but a verbal history that's shared that way, it changes how I can read the Bible if I think about, wait, their culture when they wrote the Bible was closer to the Nigerian culture than to the American culture. And does that
Right.
change what I see? And it helped me see the people writing the Bible were really just trying to do their best to interpret the world and who God might be in relation to their view of reality. It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that they knew what I know. And it doesn't have to mean that God dictated word for word, this is how to write the Bible, which is what I was taught and what I thought that I believed for a long time. But it actually makes so much more sense to me when I look at it instead as this was a guy thousands of years ago trying to understand who God is. In
Mhm.
light of thinking that the world is flat, in light of thinking that the sun goes around the earth. And it's not their fault they didn't know. They were
Right.
just doing the best they could at that time.
Right. I think that that's been the biggest challenge. Like, obviously, Paul contradicted some things, that even
Right.
that was discussed, that Jesus discussed, and especially in the Torah. So, yeah, and that's a lot of when I got into Hebrew roots for a little while, that was a big thing. A lot of people were actually rejecting the writings of Paul because of it. It's really complicated. Like people are spending so much time trying to get to know an unknowable God, but really what's happening is they're just trying to fit their now. I mean, like now with the internet and everything we know and the education system, it's like, at least in our culture, we're trying to take all of that and fit it in this tiny little box that was Paul's perspective, or the so-called words of Jesus, right? And the hard part, like you mentioned it earlier, you said the unknowable God. And like there's a huge dichotomy going on here because on one hand, people say God is knowable because here we have the evidence of who he is and what he likes and what he doesn't like, right? And this is how we're supposed to live our life in order to please him. And that's under the assumption that you know what God wants. And then on the other hand, like you just got done saying, there's an unknowable God. I mean, he really is unknowable because he himself even says that he is beyond our ways. So how do we marry those two concepts? It's like, wait a minute, I thought we couldn't know. But you're telling me that you do know, right? And that's where you start getting into what Kari Jo and I talk about is cult-like mentality, where people are saying, no, this is the only truth. And you have to do it this way or you are going to hell or whatever the consequence they come up with. So, yeah.
Yeah, and being able to let go of some of those things, the absolutes, helps you to be able to
Mhm.
read the Bible again and see it a
Mm.
different way and realize that those things that look like they contradict because people were trying to get better at understanding. Even Paul, like the evangelical church in the United States loves Paul. But if you read Paul and you stop going, everything is 100% correct, you'll realize that as Paul traveled through time, he gained understanding of who God was and how God interacts with him. So it doesn't even make 100% of sense there. And if you read Romans, which is a great book of somebody trying to describe who God is, as the chapters go on, it gets more and more awkward and tangled, and it's like one giant run-on sentence, like Paul's trying to think while writing, which he wasn't writing but dictating. The point being that then it gets to the end of chapter 11, and he goes into this whole doxology of, oh, the amazing things of God, and they're unknowable, and well, it's all just a mystery, I don't really know. And he shrugs and moves on to chapter 12.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're not looking at like through a microscope. You're looking at it like from like really far away, and you're trying to take in, oh, I'm looking at like a movie, like what are they learning along the way? What is their process like along the way? And I think that's a really beautiful way of looking at scripture, because you do see some changes in Paul. You do see them growing and changing in the process. And I guess you learn from watching the journey that they went through, not the details within the journey again.
Makes more sense to me that way, because Paul was just a human like we are.
Right.
He couldn't
Yeah.
have been all-knowing at the beginning of his missionary life and know the exact same thing then as he did at the end.
Sure. Yeah. I love that.
So I have a question, follow up, like on the use of the Bible, because clearly you view it very differently now, Stephen, and I know that. But I would be curious to know a little bit more, and also for our listeners to hear maybe how you engage with the Bible now, if at all, and how and if it informs your decision making. Because for me personally, when I stopped seeing the Bible as factual, historical, 100% true, it just didn't hold weight for me anymore in decisions I was making. And that's just how I was processing that. But I'd love to hear your reflection on your experience in that way.
Yeah, it's true that you and I view that differently and use it differently. And I think that there's room for both of those things. For me, I feel like sometimes people, especially when they talk about deconstruction and things that I see on social media regarding deconstruction, um, they throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. That if this isn't true, therefore all of it is false. And sometimes it turns into just what seems like people belligerently attacking the church, and they want nothing to do with it. And I can understand to some degree, especially if people were hurt by the church, how that ends up happening. For me, I still like recognizing that the Bible is a book that exists of collections of things, of people's thoughts from thousands of years ago. Where else do we have access to that sort of depth of history of how people think about things? So I find that there's a lot of wisdom within the Bible. There's a lot of people making mistakes and recognizing those mistakes. And a good way to avoid making mistakes is look at what other people did and try to not do that. So I still like having the Bible as a resource. I just don't necessarily assume that everything in it is to be taken as 100% apply this to your life, which admittedly, historically in my life, I didn't anyway, because I still wore clothes of mixed fibers and I trimmed the hair on the side of my beard and so on. So I just see it a little bit differently now, in that it gives me freedom to recognize that it's a process.
So what inspires you these days? I mean, we just talked about the Bible, and there's the story within it that obviously still you connect with, but is there anything else that really drives you?
I think when we're talking in terms of deconstruction, untangling, faith, um, God, things that still inspire me include the life of Jesus. I think I've had a love for who Jesus is from the beginning. And seeing it now in a slightly different light, and with the ability to ask questions that I didn't feel like I could ask before, I can look at his life as an example and the things that he taught in a slightly different way. And what you do find is that there is a consistent pattern throughout the life and teachings of Jesus of just love, just love, just love, just love, over and over and over again. And it gets glossed over sometimes within the church, and instead comes across as judgmentalism. But that doesn't really reflect the life of Jesus when I read the Bible again, when I keep looking at it. Jesus consistently was hanging out with the people who didn't belong, the ones who everyone else excluded, the ones who were unlovable. And all he did over and over and over again was love people, heal people who were injured and sick, accept the people who felt unaccepted, helping them to get back into community again. And when you think about, or you look at the Bible, one of the main verses, or one of the major verses, I guess, rather, that I heard over and over again within the evangelical church, even looks at 1 Corinthians 13 towards the end, where Paul is talking about faith, hope, and love. Like everything, after talking all about what love is and getting on a tangent, he then goes, but these three things remain: faith, hope, and love. And what does he say next? The greatest of them is love. So
Love.
he says the greatest of them is love. Yet historically, for me, it felt like the church says the greatest of those things is faith, because you needed
Absolutely.
faith to be saved. You didn't say you needed love to be saved or hope. You needed faith to be saved. But why in the world would Paul have said the greatest of them is love? And Jesus' life example is love, 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 love. And then we go, faith is more important. We probably should look
Uh-huh.
back at that and go, the greatest of them is love. And Jesus'
Uh-huh.
example of what are the greatest commandments, it was love God and love your neighbor as yourself. It wasn't exclude those who aren't quite like you. It was just keep
Uh-huh.
loving. So that's what
Yeah.
inspires me today, and how I still try to live my life, how I interact with my patients, with my coworkers, with anyone else that I come in contact with.
I love that. I love that the greatest of these is love, not faith. I really don't think I had thought about it in that way before. It's really cool. So what does community look like for you now?
Well, Kari Jo will tell you that I'm a very good hermit. If I
Uh-huh.
had my way, I would probably live in the middle of nowhere and interact with very few people. I'm quite an introverted person, which is a little odd for somebody who has made a career out of working directly with people. Um, I get a lot of social anxiety in group settings. I don't do well in group settings. In fact, I get kind of panicky at times and want to run away. So, what does community look like for me? I'm not a huge fan of community, but I do see the value in community.
Uh,
So I find ways to try to allow it to enter my life reluctantly sometimes. But I prefer smaller community, having some friends and coworkers that I have more in-depth conversations with than others, ones that I can be open with about that. Definitely within my family, I feel comfortable with that too. I have told Kari Jo before that she knows all of my friend. Not all of my friends, all of my friend, because she's the only one I need.
That's awesome. We've always done small home church throughout our Christian walk. And so for me and for us, we never really got into the, huge church thing. So it has always been a handful of people that we've connected with and find a community in that we can be vulnerable with and support when challenging times and so forth. So, yeah, I think community, just like the unknowable God, community for each person is tailored to their specific needs and personality and experience in life.
Well, thank you for giving me
Um,
permission to not have community that looks like what everyone else thinks it should look like. I appreciate that.
exactly. Yeah, of course. I think
Anna's one of
it's
the most
amazing.
validating people I know. She will make you feel normal no matter what.
Oh,
It's something I
well,
love
Oh,
about you.
thank you.
that's really sweet. Thank you. Well, I'm glad that's what that did. So, yeah, I think that you hold your own truth and you are honoring it. And I love hearing your story. I really do. And I find myself really curious to know, do you feel like you're currently struggling with or challenged in your ideas and your mental untangle? Are you untangling anything right now? Is my question.
Yeah, I am, but I'm in more difficult things of just trying to figure out still which things am I accidentally carrying with me from my past that aren't useful, that aren't
Hmm.
necessarily true. I think that I've worked through some of the bigger things that give me more freedom and recognize that God is way more loving than I ever gave him credit for, and that God is way bigger than I ever gave God credit for. And even who God is so much more unknowable than I knew before. But I'm also trying to make sure that I'm separating out like what of the Bible is American versus the Bible, and what is things that can help me in 2024. But I don't know that I can really describe exactly what I'm working on at the moment, except that I'm just trying to do better and better at letting myself um, have freedom to let go of those things that might accidentally hurt me or someone else around me.
Mhm. Yeah, my intention is always to love, but I don't always, my method and my technique and my even beliefs at the time sometimes are still flawed, you know? And so
Of
that
course.
is a refining process that I think I can relate to what you're talking about in that way. Um, I'm really curious if you have an idea, or do you ever speculate wildly what the afterlife is like?
Ooh, that's a good question. And again, this is one that probably in a couple of years I might even have a different answer. But
Of
I think that
course.
that is absolutely appropriate because even the descriptions of the afterlife within the Bible are not always the same. And I think that there probably is an afterlife. What it is going to look like, I don't know, but I expect it to be 100% positive, because when we can free ourselves from the things that limit us and just be what clearly, well, to me, clearly would be the description of God and of Jesus, of being love. I think if we can go to a pure zenith of what that would look like, that would be what the afterlife might be. Will there be any physicality to it? I'm not so sure that there even will be. I was always taught that there
Mhm.
would be, and there'd be streets of gold and a mansion built for me and all these things, but I don't know that that really makes any sense. And I don't know that it matters. I think the only part that really matters is that we get to let go of the things that are painful of life and stick to the positive things. And whether that means that we're doing that just with the people who have already passed from this life into the next, or whether we somehow also have an influence on the ongoing reality of humanity,
Mhm.
remains to be seen.
Sure. Well, it's beautiful. Are you reading any good books right now?
No. Uh, that's an honest answer. I I am reading medical literature.
Yeah. Fun. Tell us something you're learning right now.
I spend a lot of time right now reading on menopause and female sexual health and function, because I think that it was wildly underrepresented in medical literature historically, and we're starting to get a better job of figuring out that that was a need we were missing, and it has enabled me to treat my patients in a different way. So I'm reading that,
Mhm.
but not necessarily even with a theological or eternal viewpoint, just in terms of better serving people around me.
Well, that's eternal. Absolutely. 100% that's eternal. Like, you are doing eternal work and caring for and concerning yourself with how to better the lives of others is the ultimate life spent. That's how life is, to me at least. The call on all of us is to do that, and you've made it clear that that's what you're doing. I just think it's beautiful. And I'm sure that your process has got to, your own spiritual process has got to have better equipped you to do that job. Would you say?
I would say so. And I think that over time I get better at it too. As I learn more and untangle more, helps
Hmm.
me to love more. Even though
Yeah.
I felt like I was fully loving, even historically or before that, I feel like I'm even better fully loving. But I think that's probably part of humanity too, that when I was 15, a lot of the world looked black and white. And when I was 20, it was still pretty black and white. But the older that I get, the less black and white it gets. And I don't think that I'm alone in that. I think that most humans notice more and more of those changes as they get older and how they see things. So it's just part of the the journey of life. And hopefully we're using that to try to improve ourselves and to improve people around us. That's really
Yeah.
how I view a goal of doing life, is in a way that's going to benefit humanity and each other, not
Mhm.
just make myself rich or happy. I think I can be
Right.
happier in benefiting other people.
Yeah. Man, that relationship, that give and take that we get to participate in is such a beautiful, that connection, the connections we make, the impact we have on others, is just, for me at least, a driving force in how the choices I make, and the value that I feel that I put on my own personal life. Um, and I love seeing other people kind of do the same thing. It's beautiful. So I'm really curious to know, do you miss anything about Nigeria?
Absolutely. I, more days than not, still think about Nigeria. There are days still that I dream and I'm in Nigeria, and sometimes my dreams are even still in the language that we used there, which every time I wake up, then I'm either smiling because I'm happy that I'm remembering it, or I wake up and I'm
Awesome.
almost frustrated and angry that I'm not still there. The
Really?
the privilege that we had to be there is profound. That we could step in as outsiders, and that people within that culture were so willing to accept us, even though to them we looked flawed because we didn't match their their expectations. Even though we brought baggage with us, they were so accepting of who we were, and that we were there to help, that they wanted to go out of their way to let us do those things and to invite us into their lives. It was just an amazing, humbling experience to be a part of. And then medically speaking, it was one part frustration in that I couldn't save people that I felt like I could save in the United States, medically speaking. I didn't have
Mhm.
access to everything. But while it was one part frustration, it was three parts amazing privilege to be able to be there, to serve in a positive way, to impact people's lives in a way that's mysterious, and to be able to see amazing, miraculous things that didn't make sense medically, that blew my mind on a regular basis. So yeah, I
Really?
definitely miss Nigeria.
So I'm really curious, like, how do you explain those medical anomalies that seem like miracles to you?
I don't explain them. I accept
Mhm.
them as miraculous things. Science,
Mhm.
of course, is flawed. Science is never 100% correct. Our goal in science is to get more and more correct as time goes on. But there are so many
Mhm.
things I saw that didn't match science, that didn't match medicine. People who died who shouldn't have, people who lived who absolutely shouldn't have, scenarios
Mhm.
where I was beyond my capability to do anything. And so we just prayed over people and walked away, and then miraculous things happened.
Mhm.
The things that I
Well,
saw make me convinced 100% that there absolutely is a God.
yeah.
So I can't deconstruct in a way that abandons a belief in a God because of what I saw.
Right.
So that part, it just adds to the humbling experience of being in Nigeria. But it was so much fun to see God do things that we didn't expect.
I'm glad you brought that up, Stephen. Sorry, Anna. Can I
No, go
interject?
for it,
Yeah, I'm glad you
please.
brought that up because actually I've thought about that many times about you having those experiences of things that you credit as miracles. And I did not obviously firsthand have those experiences. I heard your account of them, but that lands differently just hearing about it versus experiencing it. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is I'm segueing into what I'd like you to speak about. Like, you are clearly, if anybody has listened to any of our other episodes, you are clearly in a very different spot than I am, spiritually and faith wise. And you've just kind of given us a clue as to why you are where you are at right now. Um, but I would love to hear your reflection on our relationship and I'm not like throwing you under the bus here. I just want the listeners to understand how our marriage is still working. You clearly identify as a Christian still, and I definitely do not. And you and I both know this, but I would like to hear how you personally have been able to reconcile that, just as we've moved forward on our spiritual journeys. Is
That's a
that
good
too
This is
much?
gonna be
question.
good.
Is
This is
that way
gonna
I
be
too
well,
much?
good.
it's a lot in that there's a lot to discuss there, and you don't possibly have time to cover it all. But our
Oh, we got
marriage
time.
does
We're
work.
only 35 minutes. We're good.
Our marriage absolutely is still working. And so the two of us being at slightly different places spiritually, or even significantly different places spiritually on some regards, I don't think is a deal breaker, in that I also mentioned earlier that I think within the church there's people who have different viewpoints. And I don't think that we ever, the two of us, had exactly the same viewpoint on things spiritually back in history either. I think that at times I might have thought we did, and maybe you thought we did, but it might be that we just assumed the other person viewed it and felt it the same way that we did. But in reality, I don't think we ever were 100% exactly the same. But that's okay, because how we interact with the divine power that exists is going to be different. It's going to touch different. It's going to feel and smell and taste different from one person to the next. So, how did we end up where we are? Well, it was through all of those things. I don't know that I can explain how you got to where you are and I got to where I am differently. You did say that I would identify as a Christian and you might not. I don't know if that's true, but I also don't know that it's valuable to have the label, because I don't think that the label is going to determine where we end up in eternity. I don't
Mhm.
think that if I said I was a Christian and if you said you're not a Christian and I believe this part differently than you do, then therefore we're going to be in a different place necessarily into eternity. And it also isn't going to make any useful difference today in our ability to love each other, to love our children, to love the people around us. So, do I identify as a Christian? Yeah, probably, but I don't like using that label anymore, especially now living in the South in the
Mhm.
United States, because you say Christian here, and so often that means white supremacist or white evangelical Christian, and that implies that the whole world should be under my rule somehow. And as a white middle aged man, that makes me really uncomfortable, even though I'm supposed to be the one that has all the power. So I don't know that I necessarily would call myself a Christian per se, but a follower of the teachings of Jesus. Yeah, I think I would follow in that category. And the miracles that I saw, or the things that I'm ascribing as miracles, to put that caveat for some other people who are hearing it, the things I saw as miracles absolutely influenced that, and the interactions that I had with God in times of prayer and meditation, and in studying the Bible, and in feeling God leading me in certain directions, or hearing his voice telling me to do certain things, and then amazing things happened because of that. That does force me to continue to leave a lot of space for God directly interacting in my life, whether I call myself a Christian or not.
Yeah, that's
So
fair.
I'm curious to know, and sounds like it's not a big deal for you guys, but I know in a lot of families, it's a really big deal for families to pray together in Arkansas, in the churches in my area. It's a really big deal for the father to lead the family in prayer often, for the couples to pray together, and within the church. I'm talking specifically referring. So I assume, obviously, Stephen, you mentioned that you pray, and I think Kari Jo, you maybe mentioned to me that you don't. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Yeah. So do you guys take a very personal, like you each just do your own personal things when it comes to that kind of stuff? Or do you ever find yourselves meeting in the middle? How does that work?
From my
You want
viewpoint, I would say, yeah, we kind of have our own um, spiritual lives that look different. And I look at the way that she does it and think, that's weird. And she looks at the way that I do it and probably thinks, why in the world is he still doing it that way? Um, and that's that actually lines up with humanity and seeing different cultures and how different cultures do things. The church in Africa, well, actually, I shouldn't label anything the church in Africa because it's going to be different in different places in Africa. The church in
Mhm.
where we were in Africa looked different in how they pursued spiritual disciplines than the American church. And Americans
Mm.
coming in would look at it as wrong because they weren't doing it their way, which actually is pretty classic American, right? That if it's not my way,
Mhm.
you're wrong. Um, but we can take the same approach to how each of us has our own spiritual journey right now. I know that she struggled historically, even when we were convinced that the evangelical church was right, which we've now let go of. But I know she struggled then, even with prayer and with God not necessarily doing what she thought he was supposed to do in response to prayer. I
Mm.
don't think that I viewed prayer in the same way that she did. And so I think that that caused some hurt within her life that makes it easier for her to let go of prayer and instead hold on to it as a view of meditation instead of prayer. I think that for me, prayer was more of an attempt at a conversation, but was in many regards much like a meditation aspect, where it's
Mm.
me trying to see my own position in relationship to a divine being. So I think that we actually are kind of doing the same thing, just in a different way, in a way that actually feeds us instead of one that just seems like a waste of time. We definitely had times in the past where we spent a lot of time together, praying as a family. That doesn't necessarily happen now. And I know I would love for that to still exist to some degree, but I also know that it doesn't serve her in a positive way. And if that's the case, then we may not be really doing anything useful with it.
Mm. Yeah. What about you, Kari Jo? What's
First of all, I'm leaning into the microphone. I wish there was video because I'm like eating the microphone right now. No, first of all, though, Stephen, I want to say thank you. I have noticed that. I've never brought it up because it usually happens at a time where I'm not able to say anything after. But like, I have noticed that we don't pray as a family like we used to. And I honestly am like kind of relieved and grateful for that. But like there are times where at dinner, Stephen will pray before we eat, you know, like especially if Noah comes home from college, we haven't seen him in forever. Like we're all together as a family. Like that's a joyous occasion, right? Like
Mhm.
I get wanting to pray and give thanks for that. And so like that doesn't bother me at all. So like we'll do that occasionally. And out of respect for him and the value that he places on prayer and that he sees, you know, it serving him in his life, I don't like throw a stink about it. I don't leave the room, you know, while we're praying or anything. Like I'm happy to oblige. Like I'm happy to be part of that instance. It just I would say I'm not like actively participating, you know, like normally in my Christian history, I would have probably, you know, been nodding my head or like saying thank you, Jesus under my breath or whatever, you know, like some form of engagement while
Making
somebody
clicking
else
noises.
prayed. Yeah, exactly.
Clicking noises?
I don't know if the mic can pick that up, but yeah,
That's a
that's
very
like the
Nigerian thing.
affirmation. Yeah, it's the Nigerian, like I agree. Like it's the Nigerian head nod
Can
basically.
you do it for us, Stephen?
She does it better than I do, but it's just
I don't know.
a little
I'll see
clicky
if I
noise in
can
the
do
back
it.
of
Like I
your
don't
throat where you're kind of going.
yeah, that's good. I don't know if the mic will pick it up, but I don't know if you can hear that.
Okay. Is that
Anyway,
literally like in the back of your throat, you said?
yeah, it's kind of like the back of your
Yeah,
tongue, like in the back of your palate. It's making like a click. You kind of like suck and it like makes a click noise.
Interesting. Can you
it's a
guys hear
sound
me
that
doing it?
doesn't really exist in the
We can do
American
we can
English
do a
language, but it
tutorial
does in
later,
their
Anna.
language.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean Nigerian women can do it far better than I can, but yeah, anyway, so like I'm not actively engaging in the prayer per se, but I'm there, I'm present, you know, and like for
Mhm.
me presence and being present in each moment, that feels like a gift to me. And so in a way, like as they're praying and just me being present, that's my form of prayer in that moment, that
Mhm.
I'm there
Mhm.
sharing that moment with them, and that's beautiful for me. And so like it holds a different meaning for me, or maybe a lack thereof, as far as like traditional Christian prayer, but I don't dismiss it or, you know, poo poo it, because I think it does serve a really valuable role in many people's lives. And I honor that. And especially Stephen, like he said, he's an introvert, and he 100% is like extremely introverted. And when he comes home from work, like he's all worded out, like he's done talking out loud for the most part, like, I mean, we talk, but I'm hyperbolizing, obviously. But like, I think for prayer for him, I just see it as like, it's kind of a form of processing too. Like that's how he processes through things and things that are on his mind and on his heart and he's concerned about. And he's an internal processor, 100%. And I'm clearly a verbal processor because I word vomit everything. And
It's true.
so like that serves him very well, and it just doesn't serve me anymore. And so like, I'm happy to let that go. And it is kind of, as I look at our relationship and I see how we are still doing so well in our marriage, I think it stems from a common or shared respect for each other and genuinely believing that the other person wants the best for the other person, like that we want the best for each other. And whatever that's going to look like, if it's not harmful to anyone, it's just different maybe, then it's cool. It's a go, like it's all good. So yeah, like I think, I don't know, it's not going to work for everybody. Not every marriage is going to survive a major implosion. Like you said, Stephen, like my world imploded. My deconstruction accurately describes what happened to my life. Untangling is a much better fit for what Stephen did. And not all marriages survive those things, but for some reason ours have. And you and your husband too, Anna, like it's kind of remarkable. Maybe we should do like we should have Ricky on here too and do
absolutely
a couple one where we can reflect and share laughs on parts of our journey and like the awkwardness, or well, I don't know, like looking at like what Stephen said when somebody's doing it, like what the hell is happening right now? Like what is going on? But anyway, I don't know. I probably didn't even answer the question that you had.
No, you did. That's beautiful. I just love hearing your thoughts about and how you process. I mean, I think it makes sense that Stephen connects with the idea of prayer. I think that's his way of, like you saying, verbally processing and meditating and connecting even too. Like that's, am I right, Stephen?
That actually is a really good way to describe it that I hadn't necessarily put words to in the past either. But listening to her describe it, I go, yeah, that is what I do.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, hold on to that, and I think that's beautiful that you continue to each walk in your own truth without feeling the need to like jump on the other one's journey and own it, like try to attach yourself to somebody else's journey as if it's yours, I think there's a lot of beauty and wisdom in the way that you guys are processing this experience, and I'm glad to get to witness it. It's awesome.
I'd love to say that it was just wisdom that we figured that out, but I think it just kind of happened. To me, I think a big
lot
part
of grace.
Of it is we've been through so much life together, and we've been through such amazing ups and downs, especially how hard it is to move across the world and to live in a different place and to live in a place that's unstable from American point of view, that is physically dangerous to us on many different fronts. To have been through all of that together, the thought of just jettisoning our relationship isn't even something I would consider. Like nobody else understands me like her, and nobody understands her like me in terms of what we've been through. So we absolutely can still be serving each other in a positive way, even if we don't agree on which points of Calvinism are worth considering and which ones aren't. Because again,
is there
even
a point in Calvinism worth considering?
Yeah,
maybe.
gross.
But the reality is, I mean, Calvin was just another man in the history of time who had some thoughts, and it was way after when Jesus existed. So I think that his thoughts are already less important than what Jesus's were. So it's just a person, just somebody trying to struggle their way through life, just like the rest of us.
Agreed. I love that. I love that perspective. I honestly, Stephen, I really just benefit from hearing your story, and the word untangling, I think I can relate to that to some degree too. I think at times it's felt like, I think after the initial deconstruction for me, it felt like like a deconstruction, like what Kari Jo was saying, but it eventually started feeling more like untangling. And so I think I can relate to that for sure. And just hearing how you guys have so graciously walked through your journey together and how beautiful it is that you've been able to do and accomplish some of the things that you've done and raise a family and now a career in Florida and your own life together. It's really beautiful. I'm so glad I got to hang out with you today and hear more about who you
Thank you.
are. I really actually think it'd be fun to do it again one day. Maybe we could connect again, do another podcast, something specific that you might want to chime in on. Like we come up with all kind of subjects that we like to talk about.
But I have one question I want to add before we close out. If you could give any piece of advice or encouragement or wisdom to people who are currently deconstructing or afraid of losing their faith, what would it be?
I think that realizing you don't have to abandon everything to abandon parts would be helpful. And I've seen a number of people who have trouble with that. And I think that for some people, that's just the process. They have to abandon everything and then rebuild. But you don't have to. You can let go of parts. You can grow as a human and still keep who you are. And that's okay. And I think it helped for me to see that there was a church that we were attending here where there were people who did that, and a leader within the church who did that. And then to see the Bible for Normal People, where it's people who are biblical scholars and leaders in churches and pastors, but have let go of certain parts of things that I thought you had to keep. For me, the best advice would be you don't have to let go of everything. If it's what you need to do, that's okay. But you can hold on to what you need and let go of what you don't need. And just having an open mind through that process, you're going to find more freedom on the other side of that.
It's good advice.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Appreciate that. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen, for meeting with us today.
That's a privilege. Thank you.
That's awesome. I finally get to meet your husband.
I know. Yay. So now when I talk about him, you'll know he's that tall bloke.
Yeah, that's great. All right, girl, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah.
Yeah,
let's do it. Okay. Stephen,
thanks for joining us.
We greatly enjoyed it. We'll have you on again. We'll talk about some crazy shit the next time. And until next time, peace out, motherfuckers.
Oh my gosh.
Well, friends, that wraps up this heretical episode. Thanks for listening, and be sure to rate and review our podcast and share with anyone who would be encouraged. See you next time.